this. uh, all right, so today's obviously our last lecture for at least synchronous. Don't forget to watch the asynchronous lecture on Wednesday. I don't believe I'm gonna try to post the exam. Well, not the exam, the quiz today. I don't think you're gonna have to watch the Wednesday lecture. So I think if you just watch or listen to this lecture, it should suffice. Um, so in case you want to like just take the quiz before Saturday and start your spring break before Saturday, it will give you an opportunity to do that. Because I know lecture wise, we're a little bit ahead of where we are in terms of the quizzes. You're welcome, Christina. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. So the first big theory is social learning theory, and it's probably one of the more famous effects theories. I'm sure probably most of you are familiar with this theory if you've taken any sort of psychology or sociology or maybe even anthropology. You may have run across this particular theory by Albert Bandura. And so if you're not familiar with the theory at all, we'll show you a video about the Bobo doll experiment. Basically, Albert Bandura does a Bobo doll experiment in front of a bunch of kids. So essentially it was, again, done in the lab, which again is kind of the weakness of these effects theories is that you can't replicate society in a lab. It's very difficult because society is an uncontrolled environment and a lab is a controlled environment. But anyway, so Albert Bandura essentially has this experiment where you have adults with the Bobo doll on one side of the glass, and then you have a bunch of kids on the other side that are observing the adult with the Bobo doll. And what he discovered through this experiment was that kids copy adults. So again, kids copy adults in the Bobo doll experiment. And the closest imitation happens when the adult is the same gender. So if little boys are seeing a man strike the Bobo doll, for instance, punch it, they also are more apt to punch it. If a woman is striking the Bobo doll and little girls are observing, they're also more apt to also mimic or imitate exactly what the female adult is doing. So again, closest imitation happens when the adult is the same gender. So in the Bobo doll experiment, they either beat up the doll, number one, or number two, they did nothing to the doll. In other words, they just let the doll be. And again, what Bandura discovered through his experiment was that, the kids were apt to imitate the adult. So if the adult did nothing, then the kids did nothing. If the adults were aggressive towards the Bobo doll, the adults, I should say, then the kids were also regressive towards the Bobo doll. So. That's right, Christina. Whatever Christina said is absolutely 100% correct. And I also talked about the fact, if you listen to the video, that yes, didn't like the idea of debates, and he actually preferred like, you guys familiar with the Lincoln debates that he had with Douglas way back in the day? This is for those of you who were paying attention in history class. Nobody paid attention in history class to the famous Douglas and Lincoln debates that would go on for hours and hours and hours and hours. That's what Laswell preferred. So, anyways, going back to the Bobo doll, what was the most important factor? The most important factor was attention. So, one thing that Bandura noticed that the kids had to be paying attention to the adults in the other room. If they weren't paying attention to what the adult was doing in the other room, then they weren't going to imitate what they were seeing. So what was more important is attention. Again, what is most important? Attention. The three other factors that were important were number one, retention. So retention, in other words, remembering what the adult was doing. So retention, number two. The other important factor was reproduction. So in other words, could the kids reproduce what the adults were doing? If they could reproduce the behavior, they're more likely to imitate it. And last factor was motivation. In other words, there needed to be a good reason for them to do it. So one thing that Bandura discovered in an experiment was the kids who received positive feedback for their imitation were more likely to continue doing it. So in other words, right, if your son or daughter, I don't know how many of you are parents, but if you become a parent, if your son or daughter goes out there and beats somebody up, right, and just for no good reason, and you say, "Yay, good job, way to beat that person up," then that kid is more apt to do it again and to do it again because they're receiving positive reinforcement for it. So motivation, positive reinforcement. If they receive it, they're more apt to do it. So again, the three factors beside attention was retention, reproduction or reproduce, and motivation. And so people may adopt or reject behaviors that they see modeled by role models. And this is where media is really important, right? This idea of what you're seeing, or as kids especially, is really important. And so symbolic, right? Symbolic would be an example of what I mean by mediated. The things that they see symbolically on screen is what they are apt to reproduce. Verbal, the things that actors or actresses say on screen is also apt to be reproduced. So if you're having little kids watching, I don't know, R-rated films, right? They curse, the actors or actresses curse in this particular movie or television program. Well, then guess what? Your little kid or that little kid is also more apt to reproduce and also curse as well. And then live. This is where, for instance, you're watching a sporting event live. Maybe it's a concert live. Could be a theatrical play live. If the people on there are cursing or doing something inappropriate, it also may be mimicked by children. So let's just say a singer gets up on stage. Let's say you take your, I don't know, your younger brother or sister to a concert. I don't know, they're 8 or 9 or whatever, or 10, whatever, and the singer is smoking, right, up on stage, and everybody's cheering for this guy or this woman on stage, and the kid sees this and goes, "Wow, that's pretty cool. That person up there who's smoking a cigarette, that's awesome. Look at the applause this person's receiving." Guess what? They are more apt to mimic that behavior because it's being modeled by by a role model, right? And sometimes performers, whether it's a singer, an actor, actress, whatever, become role models. An athlete, they become role models, even though they oftentimes say, well, we don't want to be role models, but okay, guess what? You are. Ah, that's a good one. Yes. Miley Cyrus is a good one because if you think about her, right, she was a Disney, wasn't she? She was a prominent actress on a Disney movie or Disney on Disney Channel, and so that she could be a role model to, tens of thousands, if not millions of young girls. And so, and if she's being rewarded for her behavior, then yeah, those young girls who look up to her um, might imitate her behavior. And so rewarding or punishing role models. So that affects if the audience is going to adopt. Again, it affects if the audience is going to adopt. So in other words, right, in a movie, right, if somebody's rewarded for, let's say, smoking or drinking, so let's just say, they like to get drunk at parties, but they're like the coolest, person in school, right? They're the alpha, right? And everybody thinks they're awesome. And so if they're being rewarded for their behavior, and again, little kids are watching this, then this behavior is likely to be imitated. Now, if the role model is punished for their behavior, let's say they're drinking or smoking and they get in trouble for drinking or smoking, and then that person who's watching this is less apt or less likely to imitate the behavior because they see that the role model is being punished for their poor behaviors. In other words, let's just say it's a teenager that's drinking, and then they might get arrested for drinking alcohol underage, right? Something like that. They may have a car accident where they might get hurt because they were drunk driving, something like that. So those sorts of things make it less likely that the audience is going to adopt. And so a lot of comm scholars who study effects um, are very leery about little kids watching, inappropriate content. I know when I was a little kid, my parents didn't, they would take us to watch all sorts of gory and crazy movies. I don't think they even cared or knew anything about effects. But a lot of people, or a lot of scholars, get concerned when little kids watch inappropriate films with, let's say, drug use or um, too much violence, unsafe sex, those sorts of things that are rewarded by characters. Scholars get very nervous about that, or they think it's not good for children, especially nowadays. The big thing right now is video games, where some scholars are saying that there's too much violence in video games and kids are playing these games and it's affecting them in a negative way. Some say that it's making them or priming them to also be violent because they're being rewarded for their violent behavior. Is this true? Well, I don't know. Any questions regarding social learning theory before I show you the video clip on Bandura? Obviously what Bandura discovered was that watching media was in fact not cathartic, right? He refuted the fact that many scholars believed at the time that if you watched violence, right, on screen, that essentially it was cathartic and that it would actually make you less violent because you were able to work out your aggressive energies um, as you were watching whatever you were watching. And so, but Bandura actually discovered that's the opposite actually happens, is that you actually it's not cathartic, then you actually become more likely to become violent by watching violence. They're just having fun. Well, you could say that.
Yeah, about the
Just
kids who
play.
are just playing with the doll, you know? I mean, yeah.
Some say it's just play, like you just said.
Hmm.
So again, um, how much can you imitate real life in a lab? I don't know. Good question. All right, so as the last part of the video suggested, Eva Bandura's theory evolves. It evolved to something called social cognitive theory. So bear in mind, those of you who are going to write your papers and use social learning theory, remember, social learning theory only applies to kids. Does not apply to adults. It was too limiting. And so this is why Bandura then created a new theory to extend it to adults. So if you're going to talk about effects that surround adults, then this is the better theory for you. Not social learning, because social learning is kids. And as Archie pointed out, maybe they were just playing. That's true. Some people have pointed that out, that well, those kids are just playing. They're just, it's just play. And it's actually later on in the semester we're going to talk about play theory and how play is just, play. So anyways, and so he changed learning to cognitive, right? Because one of the things that Bandura wanted to talk about or expand is that we also learn from our social experiences. So it's not just things that are mediated, but we also learn from our surroundings, right? We learn from our friends, we learn from our teachers. Yes, of course, we learn from the media. We learn from, if we go to church, we learn from our pastors or our priests or ministers or whoever. We learn from our family members, et cetera, et cetera. You learn from your teammates. You learn from all these other social experiences besides just learning from media, or just besides learning just from observing, one adult in a different office or in a different room. And so all these learned behaviors that you learn, right, throughout your life are essential to a person's personality. So one of the things that Bandura is talking about here, right, is your surroundings, right, who you surround yourself with is immensely critical in terms of who you are going to become as an adult, right? This is why, I don't know how many of you grew up in sort of like a gang environment, or maybe there were some people that were, a little bit edgy or problematic or whatever. I know I did. So my parents would always say, "Oh, it's like watch out for that kid," or it's like don't hang out with that kid too much, or et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if you guys had that conversation with your parents, but and one thing they were getting at, my parents, without them knowing anything about social cognitive theory, was that yeah, you learn these learned behaviors that you learn from others, including your friends, play a central role in who you become later in terms of like your personality. Is that clear? This is why your parents say watch out for your friends. Or they'll say, I like that person. I like him or her as your friend. Or I like him or her as your boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. It's because they're using social cognitive theory without using social cognitive theory explicitly. Anyways, so another important part about this theory is that each individual behavior witnessed can change thinking, right? And so think of this as more passive learning, this idea, right, that we can learn passively through observing others, right? We just don't learn actively by doing. We also can learn by watching. This is why they say, or I always say, Your best teacher in life is by watching other people make mistakes. That should be your best teacher in life is that. It's like, why make those mistakes if you can learn from others? Yep, it's true. Us adults can do that, Alyssa. The sad part is the sad part about it is that we as teenagers or we as preteens or tweens, we're rebelling and we don't listen to our mom and dad. I grew up around so many gang members who my parents said, don't hang out with those kids. And now they're either dead or in jail, a lot of them. So yeah, it's true. So again, each individual behavior witness can change thinking cognitively. So for instance, right, let's just say that you were hanging out with a bad friend and your bad friend shoplifts, right? And so they do it well, right? They know how to sneak. Well, this is before they had cameras. They could sneak stuff into their pants, or they knew how to, like, steal things without getting caught. And so you're witnessing this, and so you observing this, right, can change your behavior. In other words, thinking, like, you might think to yourself, I can probably do this too. I wonder if I can do this. Or, right, you might say, I see it, and I know they're getting away with it, but I'm too much of a chicken, or I'm going to feel guilty. So even though I am witnessing this, it's not necessarily going to change me. That's an important part about this theory. Questions so far? Okay, so for this social cognitive theory, we need to think about stuff in terms of this triangle. I'll get to the slide later, but think of things in sort of this triangle, right? This triangle between personal, behavioral, and environmental. So, and within this triangle, right, there's learned behaviors, and each behavior seen can lead to a change. Maybe, okay, that's critical. Maybe, right? Seeing your friend or the person that you're hanging out with shoplift and get away with it might change your behavior, or maybe it doesn't, right? You might also become a shoplifter, or maybe not. You might just say, no, that's not for me. I'm not going to do that. If I get caught, my parents are going to kill me, or whatever keeps you from doing it. So it doesn't necessarily lead to change just because you learned a behavior, right? Just because you learn something and you've seen something doesn't necessarily mean you're going to change. It might mean you change, but it doesn't guarantee you will change. So personal. So the triadic relationship, we have personal. We have a person who either has high or low efficacy, right? So efficacy, in other words, is more likely or more observational learning behavior. So again, more observational learning behavior, high efficacy. So this is where if you relate closely to the person who's doing it, right, that means you have a high efficacy. In other words, you're identifying with the person who's doing it. So going back to my example about the shoplifting, this person, right, is that's shoplifting is a close friend. Maybe he or she might be a neighbor, right? You grew up with this person. You're like best friends. So obviously you're going to highly identify with this person who is shoplifting, if that makes sense. So again, high efficacy means more observational learning behavior. So meaning that you're more apt to relate to or identify with the person who's actually doing the behavior. So another example, right, is a character on screen, right? And maybe this person reminds you of you, right, on some level. And so if this person's drinking or smoking or, doing things that are sort of um, self-destructive, and if you have a high efficacy towards this person, this character on screen, then you're also more apt to sort of copy this behavior. It's more observational learning behavior because you relate closely to this particular character or person. So number 2 is behavioral. And behavioral is the response that a person receives after completing the task, or behavior, I should say. So the response that a person receives after completing the behavior. So whether that's positive or negative, right? The response that a person receives after completing the behavior. So going back to my example about the shoplifter, right? And so we had one person in our group of friends who was a shoplifter, and we used to give him so much crap and about him being a shoplifter. And so actually over time he stopped doing it. The reason being is because we were giving him negative feedback for shoplifting, because we were like saying to ourselves, dude, we're we're like on the wrestling team, you're going to get us in trouble, and if we get in trouble we're going to get kicked off the team, because our coach was like, there was no any sort of bad behavior, we were in trouble, and that included even getting kicked off the team. So if we were around somebody who misbehaved, or even if it wasn't us, we were going to get in some serious trouble, which including getting kicked off the team. So we used to give him so much crap about him shoplifting that he eventually stopped shoplifting. Now, if we had given him positive reinforcement, right? So let's just say, like, that was cool, man. That's awesome job of shoplifting. How'd you do that? Oh my God. It's like, give us some of that candy or whatever that he shoplifted. Then this person would be more apt to continue doing it. Exactly. Good peer pressure. So there's good peer pressure and then there's bad peer pressure, right? And so this peer pressure is, again, very important. This goes back to what I was saying about your mom and your dad, right? Your mom and dad are because they're adults, they know better than us, especially for kids. They can see who has good character or bad character. And so good peer pressure puts everybody in line, right? Obviously, in a positive way. Negative peer pressure, or bad peer pressure, as Alex would say, um, then you can actually lead somebody more astray. So, for another example, on the negative side, right? Gang members who like paint graffiti or get into fights or those sorts of things, they are rewarded for their behaviors, right? That means they're more apt to continue that behavior. Questions on behavioral. This idea of peer pressure, of good or bad peer pressure, what Alex said is a good way of putting it or thinking about it. So number 3, environmental, are aspects of the environment or setting that influence the individual's ability to be successful at a behavior. So again, this is think about the person's surroundings, right? What their parents. Your parents are our parents are very important role models in terms of like how we're going to grow up, right, as individuals. Our teachers can be very important as well. And I'm not necessarily us as college professors, because I can barely get you guys to upload stuff on the right platforms. But like your teachers, like your small teachers, when you're little tiny kids, like when you're like in the first or second grade, third grade, the teachers in your early childhood, wow, those people are so influential in terms of like how you're going to become as an adult. These teachers in the in the K through 3 are like so important. Um, your interactions that you have with the media in terms of like what kind of media do you consume, um, law enforcement in terms of like what's your interaction with police officers? What is it like? Um, your church, if you go to church, um, if you're a member of a team, right? If you're members of a club, all these sorts of things. If you're part of drama, all these other things play a critical role in who you become as a person. So any questions on this idea of environmental? Okay, so now we've talked about how Bandura talks about the big, right? The big triangle, these big things, these big personal, these behavioral, and then environmental. Now, for primary capabilities, think about us more as individuals, right? Yes, he's acknowledging that our environment is immensely important. Our friends, all those sorts of things are very important. Who we identify with is very important. This is all sort of like, macro stuff. Think of the four primary capabilities as more micro. It's just like more like who you are as a person, right? Internally, who you are. So there's four primary capabilities. Again, think about who you are as an individual. There's number one is symbolizing capabilities, symbolically perceive events in messages, evaluate outcomes, construct possible solutions. This is really important because not everything should be a learned behavior. In other words, you shouldn't learn lessons from doing, right? So for instance, if you see this sign that says danger live wires, you shouldn't reach out and grab the wire to see what's going to happen to you. You're going to die, right? You shouldn't just walk out in the middle of the street, especially where I live, and even when there's a stop sign, and just assume the car is going to stop. You that you're going to die if you do that, okay? So you got to be able to learn from just observing, okay? This is why it's important, because if you don't learn from observing, if you don't learn from observing, you're going to die. You will die. You're not going to survive to adulthood. Does that make sense? That you have to learn from observing. Number one. Otherwise, you're not going to live to an adult. You're gonna get run over by a car. You're gonna touch a live wire. You're gonna drink poison. You're gonna do something that's gonna kill you, and so you don't want to live that way or do that, because you gotta learn through observing. Okay, number two, there's self-regulation capabilities, and these are again positive or negative feedback systems. So this is again your internal voice, right? Your internal voice saying, that was good or that was bad, right? And so this is this is your super ego talking to you, right? Think about Freud. So this is like you feeling negative, guilty if you didn't do something like you were supposed to do. Okay, this is your own self-regulation capabilities. It's your positive or negative feedback system within you. Number three, what is your self-reflective capabilities? Meaning people think about their own actions and decide to proceed or adjust, right? So, for example, I had a friend in high school. This guy, good looking guy, really super popular, really good soccer player. Um, but he loved to go super fast on motorcycles. Loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it. I would see him racing by on a motorcycle, like, I don't know, going pretty fast. And this is back in the day where we had no helmets. And so I didn't personally tell him anything, but I know people had to tell him that, dude, you got to be more careful riding that motorcycle of yours. I'm sure he got told that more than once. I'm sure he got more than one ticket because, again, he would be racing through our neighborhood super fast. And I would see him before school and after school, racing out of school super fast. And so I'm sure he knew that riding a motorcycle very quickly, very fast, is kind of dangerous, right? Any of you who ride motorcycles know inherently, okay, if I ride a motorcycle really fast, it's a little might be a thrill, but it's dangerous. And so you can choose, right, to either proceed, keep doing what you're doing, or adjust and say, well, maybe I'll wear a helmet, maybe I'll wear like, my body armor, um, maybe I won't ride so fast, those sorts of things. Does that make sense? You evaluate the risks and you decide whether or not you're going to proceed or not. What do they need to do again? What do you mean, Christina?
I think she meant like for self-reflective capabilities that people, right? They need to think about their own actions and perceive, or they adjust.
Right. They need to think about their own acts. Right. They need to think about their own actions and proceed or adjust. So again, going back to my friend, well, he wasn't really my friend, just somebody I knew. Um, and again, he would ride a motorcycle. Again, everybody thought he was the coolest dude on campus because he would ride a motorcycle. Imagine a teenager riding a motorcycle. Anyway, and so he either had two choices. He could either proceed and keep doing what he was doing, not slow down, not wear a helmet, not wear body armor, all those sorts of things, or adjust his behavior. Now, unfortunately, in the case of this particular person, he ended up crashing into a telephone pole and dying. Does that make sense? So yes, you're right, Archie. People think about their own actions, and then they either have a choice to proceed or adjust. Any questions on self-reflective capabilities that we, again, right, are monitoring our own actions? Now, number four is where media is probably takes the biggest role. Number one and number four. So we learn through our various mediums, right, including observing. So I know some of the people in my high school that rode motorcycles after his terrible accident started wearing helmets. Some of them, I knew a few of them that said, I'm not going to ride so fast anymore. They learned, right, through observing. But you could also learn through, let's say, watching media. So I don't know. Is there such thing as driver's ed anymore? Does anybody? I haven't been in high school obviously in forever. I'm old. Is there such thing as driver's education anymore?
Yeah, I see them all the time.
Yes, there is. Okay. So when I was in school, we used to watch this thing called Red Asphalt. I don't know if that is shown in schools anymore. Yes. So Bailey knows exactly what I'm talking about. So yes, Red Asphalt. Oh my God. I was like traumatized for like a week, maybe forever, actually. And so I remember being this kid going, we're watching what? We're watching Red Asphalt. And it was just, if anybody's ever seen it, it's just this really, at least for teenagers, a pretty graphic um, documentary about the dangers of drunk driving, the dangers of, if I recall correctly, of driving recklessly or too fast or whatever. But it's pretty, I remember it being pretty graphic. Maybe I'm misremembering. It was pretty graphic. And so, anyways, the point being, and I think the teacher's point for showing red asphalt when we were kids, as teenagers, where I think we were 15 or something like that, and we're in the process of getting our driver's permit. And so the whole point of showing that is to this idea of vicarious capability, learning through media that, hey, don't drive recklessly, don't drink and drive, be careful. You're now maneuvering something that's very dangerous, this thing called a car, and if you're not careful, you can hurt yourself and hurt others, sort of thing.
I know for what my dad told me, they did it in my high school, like my freshman year, but they stopped doing it. I don't know why. Um, for him back when he went to high school in the 80s, they took a car that was like a result of a drunk driving accident during prom week, and they would put it like in the quad, just so like all the kids could see it and be like, look, this is what happens if you're like being irresponsible. Like this is the car. Like you don't even want to know what happened to the people inside of it. So
Oh, yeah, we had the same sort of thing. Oh, dang, that's depressing.
yeah, I don't know what that would fall under. If it would fall under like vicarious capability, or
No, it
I don't
is.
know.
No, it is. It is because you can learn through the media. It can be learned through others. It can be learned through live. It can be learned through a whole lot of things. But that's pretty intense, Haley, to have a stage funeral. That's wow. That would be also fall under number 4, vicarious capabilities, this idea of learning through uh, observed behavior or various mediums, I should say. Yeah, yeah, I think I'd be freaked out after that. I don't, maybe not. I was a kid, so I think when I was a kid, I used to feel like I was gonna live forever. I don't feel that way anymore. That's all pretty intense. Well, guess what? Your teachers, your administrators, um, are using social cognitive theory on all of us. It's a pretty effective tool. Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. That's rough. So learning doesn't always change behaviors. Does that make sense? So even though you guys watched this traumatic funeral, that's just pretty freaking intense. Um, for some kids, right, learning, watching that fake funeral may change the behavior, but then some of them don't care. Hmm. Does that make sense, guys, ladies, everyone, folks? Learning doesn't always change behavior.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that have the mentality like, oh, well, that happened to them, but I can handle it. Like,
Right.
you know,
Exactly. There is actually the reverse effect that we already learned about in social judgment theory, the boomerang effect. It could happen as well. That you could learn something and feel like it doesn't apply to you, and and proceed, which would be number 3. Hmm. Interesting. And your schools must have had a lot of money because I went to a poor school, so they didn't do all that for us. But hey, good for you guys. That's awesome. A hotel. That is cool. So, any questions on this triadic relationship and that learning doesn't always change behavior? Just because you learn how to fire a weapon, for instance, doesn't mean you're going to go out and shoot somebody, for instance. Just because you learn how to shoplift doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go out and shoplift. Just because you learn how to ride a motorcycle doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go out and speed, you know, and race around with no helmet or armor or anything like that. Hmm. Well, if you have dirt everywhere, I think it's much safer, at least for a motorcycle riding, I would imagine. Any questions on this before I show you this about the idea of video games? Is it good or bad?
You know, I will say though, I think what's true about video games is that, you know, people do get rage quit, you know, kind of like when you road rage because someone cuts you off. It's the same thing. I think, I don't know. It just makes me think about how like it could probably cause violence in that sense, you know, someone keeps killing you and over in an online game, and then yeah, you get violent, you know, through your voice or
Yeah, it actually could prime you to become violent.
Exactly.
I don't play video games because my wife would divorce me. So because I have addictive personality, I really do. So if I started playing video games, I'd become addicted. I'm sure. I'm positive. So, anyways, here's are violent video games good, bad for you?
Video games come in all shapes and sizes, whether you love leading raids in World of Warcraft, exploring Hyrule and Breath of the Wild, or launching very angry birds into piggies on your phone. But a lot of games involve some kind of violence, from battling monsters to guns and explosions, and that's where some controversy comes into play. I assume you've heard it before. Violent video games are dangerous because they make people playing them more aggressive in real life. So, do they? Psychologists have been trying to figure this out since the 1980s, but a lot of new research is helping us better understand who might be most at risk and why. In 2010, a meta-analysis of 136 papers looked at whether video games caused aggression and other negative outcomes. A typical experiment had people play either a violent or a non-violent game, and then measured aggressive thoughts, feelings, or behaviors. Now, it's not like researchers stick participants into an MMA fight in the lab. Instead, psychologists create situations where people think they're harming someone, like blasting them with loud noises or forcing them to drink a lot of hot sauce. But nobody is actually there to hear the loud sounds or to feel the burn. To try and measure thoughts or feelings, psychologists might record someone's heart rate, or they could ask questions like, how calm do you feel? Or give a scenario and ask, how will this person solve their problem? Other times they have people play quick mind games, like completing words with missing letters to see how many aggressive sounding ones they choose. Overall, the meta-analysis showed that playing violent video games seems to temporarily increase aggressive behaviors, thoughts, and feelings, as well as desensitize people to violence and decrease empathy. They also found some long-term effects, although not as many studies looked at that. But not all research has shown negative results. Plus, some papers have shortcomings with their methods, like comparing a violent action shooter to a non-violent puzzle game, even though they're completely different genres. And like a lot of behavioral psychology, the results aren't one-size-fits-all. Different players have different preferences and personalities. So instead of just asking whether people can be affected, newer research is trying to understand who might be more affected. Various studies have found that the angrier or more aggressive someone tends to be, the more likely they are to show aggression after playing a violent game. Psychologists have also tested for moral disengagement in players, the feeling that moral standards don't apply in some situations. Like, it's okay to steal candy sometimes because, like, at least you're not burning down the candy store. One study in 2014, for instance, had people play either a violent Grand Theft Auto game or a non-violent, like, pinball or golf game, and then answer survey questions to measure their moral disengagement. Then, participants did a short logic test to win raffle tickets for a prize, and they scored that test themselves, so if they wanted to, they could cheat. Lastly, they were placed in a competitive reaction time game where they could blast a partner with a loud noise. And after playing the violent video game, the more moral disengagement someone reported, the more aggressive behaviors and cheating they showed. I will say that GTA is basically a game that, like, its entire worldview is moral disengagement. So it's not just the violence, it's got a perspective. Another line of research uses self-determination theory to understand people's motivations while they play games. This theory states that people have three innate psychological needs: competence, or feeling capable, autonomy, or feeling in control, and relatedness, or feeling connected to others. You can experience all these things while playing video games, but without them, researchers think games can cause negative things like aggression. One series of experiments in 2014 focused on competence. They made games more or less difficult difficult by making the controls easy or hard to use, or by changing the challenge level of the game itself. And when the participants felt like a bad player, they showed more aggressive feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. Whether the game was violent or not didn't even matter. I mean, there's a whole genre of YouTube videos of this. And this could also explain why some research has found a difference between hardcore and casual gamers. A 2015 study, for instance, found that more skilled players showed fewer aggressive thoughts after playing a violent game made from like a modded version of Skyrim. The researchers thought more experienced gamers might be more like in the zone while playing, focusing on the actions as a means to an end instead of on the violence of it all. But players with less skill could have just been more frustrated by the game, and any difference in aggression could be chalked up to frustration, not the violence, which could be a flaw in those kinds of studies. Now, what you do
So as you can see here, it's super complicated in terms of like whether or not violent video games really do affect us as players. Going back to social cognitive theory, I think a lot of it depends on who we are, right? Who are we? And so I think it's going to have a different impact on different people, depending again on the four things: your vicarious capability, depending on your self-reflective capability, depending on your self-regulation capability, and then of course the symbolizing capability probably all have an impact or a role in terms of like how you're going to react to these video games, right? So I like the last point that he made about unskilled. I'm sure because I don't play video games very often, I'm totally unskilled, and I'm pretty competitive, and so I'm sure I would get really frustrated and walk out or storm out after I lost again. And so I'm sure that would happen to me, at least in the beginning. But again, I try to stay away from video games because no bueno. Any questions on self-reflective, in social cognitive theory, I should say? Yeah, being competitive is my strength, but it's also my weakness for sure. All right, so reinforcement and phenomistic theory. An important thing to remember here is that Clapper's talking about. Think about brands or think about your ideology, right? When I talk about this theory, if you think about, branding of products, or if you think about your own personal ideology, it'll help you understand this particular theory better. So one of the things that Thomas Clapper talks about is this idea that we as humans want to avoid cognitive dissonance, right? And so we want our emotions, right, or our attitudes and beliefs to be in harmony with who we believe we are, with our ideology. And so anytime there's sort of like a conflict between, let's say, our beliefs and let's say that something comes along that really messes with our beliefs, we start experiencing cognitive dissonance, right? So we want to avoid this harmony. So an example, and I love my cousin, by the way, before I say this, talk about the story. And so I love my uncle, who just recently passed away, by the way, of cancer. Great guy. Anyways, he was really, really religious, and he loved his daughter so much. And so he got up during the wedding, and he told everybody that, he was really happy that his daughter was getting married as a virgin. I don't know why he did this. I don't know. I really don't know. But he would have felt a great deal of cognitive dissonance if I had told him that, your daughter used to like hang out in my apartment when I would leave town and take care of my cat with her boyfriend. So she probably is not, a virgin. Of course I didn't say that to him. Of course not. because otherwise he would have felt such immense cognitive dissonance. Does that make sense? Because he, again, very conservative, very religious, and he had this strong belief about sort of being pure, especially if you're a woman. I know that's a very archaic way of thinking. Question?
So kind of like you don't want to hear something, you don't want to hear the truth, right? Like anything that goes against your values, let's say,
right,
or his complete opposite,
or even his belief that his daughter was like pure or perfect. And I think it would have messed with his head if I had said anything. Of course, I'm not going to say anything. I would never do that to my cousin. But he would have felt, again, a great deal of cognitive dissonance because, again, he was a very, very religious person. He had these very strong beliefs. He was very, very conservative. And, and he thought that he had raised his kids that way, which he did. I mean, they're cool people, but just not to that extent. So hopefully that makes sense. The whole idea of cognitive dissonance, this inner drive to hold beliefs and attitudes in harmonies. And anything that goes against your beliefs and attitudes, you create disharmony. So an example is, or I should say there's 3 factors that play play an important role in you avoiding cognitive dissonance. So another way of thinking about cognitive dissonance is that if you are a Republican, you're going to watch certain types of programs. Or if you're a Democrat, you're going to watch certain types of programs that are going to keep your beliefs and attitudes in harmony. And because you don't want to feel cognitive dissonance if you're a Republican or Democrat and you're watching the other networks that are critiquing your political ideology, and it may create disharmony in you. So anyways, you pick media, selective exposure. You pick media that only fits your beliefs. Again, you pick media that only fits your beliefs. Going back to my uncle, right? He only chose to focus on, right, certain things about my cousin, about his daughter. Selective exposure that fit his beliefs. And then next is, so selective exposure is you only watch media that fits your beliefs. Selective retention, you only, you perceive, I should say, you retain, I should say, what is it? You retain information that fits your beliefs. Selective retention, you select information that fits your beliefs or your ideology. So let's just say that you have a stereotypical view of Black people and of Latinos, Latinx. And let's just say that in the news story, there was a negative story about a Black person or a Latinx person, and you're more apt to remember that negative story about that Black person or that Latinx person rather than remembering the good stories about that Black person or that Latinx person. You're only going to remember the stories that are negative because your belief system is that you have a negative perception of these individuals. Does that make sense? Selective retention. Retain information that fits your beliefs or your ideology.
I feel like that happens a lot when usually African American men are killed by police. A lot of the time you might see media or you might see people, whether it's on, I don't know, Facebook or whatever, and they'll say, oh, well, this man or this woman had a criminal record. They did this 10 years ago. And because they kind of want to like I don't know, they want to like maybe not feel as bad that this person was killed by, this unarmed person, let's say, was killed by a police officer. Let's say, oh, they committed this crime 10 years ago. And I don't know if that falls under the idea that they kind of want to perceive it in a way where they don't feel as guilty.
Yeah, you're right, because they have this belief, this very strong belief system, and they believe in law enforcement, right? They believe in law and order. They believe in police officers.
And they might not look at like the fact that, the last 10 years they've had a clean record and they've been doing better, but they'll look at something like 10 years ago or vice versa. I'm not sure,
No, either way is fine. Yeah, either way works. Maybe you're in your belief system, you have distrust for police, right? This is belief. And so let's just say, and I don't know, let's just say that using force was appropriate in that particular case. You're still going to probably side with the other person rather than the police if you have a distrust in law enforcement. Other questions? So we have also selective perception, and that's perceived only through our personal lens. So perceived only through our personal lens, what we let in and what we don't let in. So again, it's perceived through our personal lens, what we let in and what we don't let in. And we are in control of this. We control selective perception, right? We are the ones that are controlling what we let in or what we don't let in. And this is influenced by a bunch of different things, right? So it's influenced by our friends, our family, the media, church, your surroundings play an important role in our selective perception. And so the important part to remember about this is that all these factors play a role in avoiding cognitive dissonance. And the stronger your belief and attitudes are about a particular issue, as I don't know who was speaking, but they're more apt to fit that narrative into their ideology in order to avoid cognitive dissonance, disharmony. So what does the media maintain? The media maintains the status quo, right? So the media, in other words, isn't teaching you anything different, right? For the most part, it's just teaching you the status quo. So if you think about brands, right, whether it's the Disney brand, the Nike brand, the Apple brand, whatever brand, watching an advertisement about that particular brand, it's just reinforcing your belief. In other words, right, if you have a high opinion of Disney, for instance, then that media coverage is just going to reinforce your feelings. If you don't like Disney for whatever reason, then watching that media is just going to reinforce your feelings even further. So it just reinforces your ideology, whatever your ideology is, right? If you're highly Republican, again, it's just going to reinforce your ideology in terms of being highly Republican. If you're highly Democrat, it just reinforces your ideology about being highly Democrat. And if you're highly conservative, you're going to watch everything through a highly conservative lens, like my uncle, may he rest in peace.
So pretty much like reassurance, right?
The media acts as a good way of thinking about it. It's sort of like it reassures you. It's sort of like the security blanket. It just reinforces your belief system. Now, that said, the one time and it doesn't maintain the status quo is if you're introduced to something new, right? You've never experienced this before in your entire life. It's the first time you've run across this sort of character, for instance. And so anytime you run across something new, it may like jolt you, right? It might shake you up because it's no longer maintaining the status quo. So in other words, right, you may actually feel some cognitive dissonance when you experience something new that you've never seen before in your entire life. Also, the other time is when it doesn't maintain the status quo, is when a person wants to change. If somebody wants to change their ideology or change who they are, oftentimes it doesn't maintain the status quo. They are changing. So that means they're going to change their selective exposure. They're going to change their selective retention. They're going to change the selective perception. And they're going to pick media that's going to reflect that change if a person wants to change. And so now, mind you, Clapper produced this theory or came up with this theory before when TV was just starting traditional television. So hence the question, outside influences, are they stronger than media today? So some would say things like social media, your friends might be a bigger impact on who you become today than the media is, for instance. So for example,
it's been a long road, but let's take a look at some of the biggest steps we've made. Welcome to Ms. Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 groundbreaking moments for LGBTQ plus characters on TV.
Business. I have business.
Before we begin, we publish new videos every day, so be sure to subscribe for more great content. For this list, we're looking at major moments of representation in the television industry for characters that identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or otherwise queer.
That's funny. Yeah. No, I think what you're sensing is a very, very strong I like men vibe.
Number 10. First openly transgender performer to receive an Emmy nomination, Orange is the New Black. Trans performers playing trans characters in media have unfortunately been few and far between. But when Orange is the New Black became an instant hit in 2013, Laverne Cox made a major breakthrough.
If you want to skip that shower line, do the 5 a.m. or the 5 p.m. That's my secret.
Her sympathetic and lovable portrayal of Sophia, a trans woman struggling to continue connecting with her family, earned her a well-deserved Emmy nomination for Outstanding Guest Actress in a Comedy Series. Since then, her career has taken off, and in addition to an array of fantastic performances, she continues to be a major trans advocate, helping to make huge leaps forward for the transgender community.
At the end of the day, we have to highlight the humanity of trans people and lift up trans people's stories. It's been very frustrating.
Number 9. A gay dad shown raising a child, Soap. Billy Crystal's Jody Dallas was among the first gay characters on television, and one of the most prominent among them.
When we were younger, there was no such thing as homosexuals.
The character wasn't entirely well received by LGBTQ plus groups, generally due to the fact that his sexuality was mostly in the background, and he considered a sex change, despite being gay and not transgender. Nevertheless, he fostered a child with Carol after a one-night stand, making him one of television's first gay fathers.
Your daddy's little girl,
Though initially Carol took custody of his daughter, Jody grows throughout this storyline, learning how to become a father and ultimately winning custody.
Did you ever frequent a bar known as Barney's?
Was that you?
Number 8. Various same-sex teen relationships.
so that the Soap character, Billy Crystal's depiction of a gay character on Soap, that was a sort of a groundbreaking moment, at least in terms of me, as a little kid. I remember watching that going, wow, that's interesting. And so the point about this is that, right, the media can play a huge role in maintaining our status quo through the choices we pick in terms of media. But again, right, the media at times can introduce something new to us, and then it's all, how do we respond to this new information, right? Do we feel any sort of cognitive dissonance? How do we respond? Do we embrace this change that we see in front of us on screen, or do we get locked into a certain ideology and not want to change, right? Not acknowledge that there's other sexual orientations out there. So how do we react to these new images that we're seeing on screen? And so again, it really varies depending on the person. The effect that it's going to have really varies on that individual. And so in the case of Soap, right, I think some say that one of the reasons why the show was canceled was it was too groundbreaking, too controversial, and that's one of the reasons why they decided to cancel that particular show, which I thought was, an incredible show, even though I was just a little kid watching it, going, "Well, this is great." So in the case of Soap, right, the viewer has two choices essentially. They can either embrace this character and keep watching the show, or, which unfortunately happened, a lot of people decided to stop watching the show and ratings dipped and the show was eventually canceled. And so, but it's all a matter of how the individuals respond to this new information. I have a sense that if Soap was to air today in 2021, it obviously would be no big deal, but it was a huge deal back in the late 70s and in the early part of the 80s. Yeah, that was Billy Crystal when he was a young man. So if anybody ever has a chance to watch Soap, I don't know if Soap's even available to watch. But it's a really good show. It was a really good show. Unfortunately, again, the controversy kind of killed it, unfortunately.
Thanks, Professor. You really kept me engaged. This was nice.
I get myself so engaged that I lose track of time. I'm sorry. It's what happens in front of a screen.
Yeah, I saw Christina. She put that we have a spring break next week.
That's right.
All right, cool.
Have a great spring break. Be safe, of course.
You too.
Yeah, I might be at a hospital, but it's good. It's good timing.
I'm sorry about that. Sorry about that, sir.
No, it's a good thing. We're gonna have a son.
Oh yeah! Congrats, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, hopefully he arrives during spring break.
Ooh! All right, man.
Yeah.
I was thinking hopefully like an Easter baby. That'd be cool.
April Fool's baby.
That's right. Oh man. Well, yeah. Have fun. Hope it goes well, my man. Have a great day.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Professor. See you in a couple weeks, and good luck with your son, right? You're having a son?
Yeah, he's a boy. He's going to be a boy.
Awesome. Well, that's
another boy.
Health to your wife and your family.
Yes, thank you. She's oh man, women go through a lot of stuff.
I agree. Have a good spring break. Talk to you in a few weeks.
Yes.